Imagine this. It's the dead of winter, and you're stuck in a tiny wooden hut with barely any clothes, frost creeping beneath the door cracks, ice crystallizing on your breath. Your fingers are numb, your toes feel like frozen popsicles, and the cold seems to seep through every inch of your body like a relentless ghost. Now picture living in that freezing hell not for one night, but for weeks at a time with no heating bills, no electric blankets, no cozy fireplaces. Just raw, bone-chilling, stomach-turning cold. This was the brutal reality for Vikings, those fierce Scandinavian warriors known for raiding, pillaging, and, surprisingly, some incredibly clever survival hacks. So how did these medieval ice warriors keep warm when the mercury plunged well below -30 degrees F, and glaciers basically knocked on their doorsteps? You're about to discover a Viking survival secret so wild, it might just melt your brain faster than their animal fat heaters melted the Arctic chill. Here's the kicker. These Vikings weren't just huddling around fires or piling on endless layers of fur. Nope. This might be the strangest Viking survival trick you've never heard of. They literally turned animal fat into 24-hour room heaters. Yes, you heard that right. Forget electricity or gas. These ancient northerners extracted warmth from what some of us would consider waste. Imagine burning something in your house that smells less pine forest and more grandma's forgotten lard jar. Yet that smell meant survival. This wasn't just a flickering flame. It was a consistent, cozy heat source that powered their homes through the darkest, coldest nights, rivaling the warmth output of a modern 1,000-watt electric heater. Let's unpack this. First, picture the Viking environment. Think endless frosty nights, with snow stacked so high it almost swallowed their small wooden villages. Their homes were simple timber constructions, often with only a central hearth that barely pushed out heat beyond a few feet. Dress codes were generous with heavy wool, leather, and fur, but those only slowed the inevitable freezing, especially since insulation technology was basically medieval bubble wrap at best, and the cold laughed at their attempts. So how did the Vikings innovate beyond the typical fire-in-the-middle-room setup? The answer lies in the fats of the animals they raised and hunted: seals, reindeer, cattle, and often whales. These creatures' fat was a treasure trove, loaded with fuel-dense oils that burned longer and hotter than regular wood. But it wasn't just about crudely lighting a slab of lard on fire. The Vikings developed a method to process and burn this fat in a controlled way, creating what we'd call ancient hot water bottles on steroids, fat lamps, heaters, and even makeshift radiators. Here's the science behind it. Animal fat, particularly blubber and tallow, burns at a higher temperature and with a steady, low flame because of its unique fatty acid composition. The Vikings learned to carefully render this fat, melting it slowly to remove impurities, and then stored it in stone or clay containers lined inside their homes. When lit, these fat heaters gave off radiant heat that was much more stable and lasted far longer than wood fires, which would need constant attention and replenishing. Imagine a flame that could quietly bake your tiny home at a toasty 70 degrees F, when outside it was a bitter -30 degrees F. That's not magic, that's fat science, Viking style. But wait, there's more. This burning fat produced a kind of ambient heat diffusion unlike anything wood fires could muster. Wood fires create localized heat. You sit near the fire to feel warm, but the rest of the room stays cold. These fat heaters worked more like a medieval version of modern radiant floor heating. Because fat burns evenly at a relatively low temperature, the containers acted almost like heating elements, gradually warming the entire room by radiating heat through the walls of their clay or stone basins. The Vikings were basically pioneering the idea of a heat panel centuries before engineers dreamed it up. Now think about the smell. Animals rich in fat aren't exactly known for scents that scream, "Come and snuggle." Burning fat gave off a peculiar aroma, part campfire, part smoky bacon, part, well, less appealing. It might sound nasty now, but for the Vikings, that smell was the perfume of survival, an ancient form of HVAC with a whiff of ruggedness. Best of all, these fat heaters didn't require constant stoking or attention like wood. They burned for hours, even overnight, proving to be efficient and low maintenance, ideal for long polar winters when chopping firewood wasn't exactly a fun late-night hobby. But all that warmth would vanish if the Vikings hadn't paired their fat flames with one more trick: insulation from within. Not just wool and fur, but they designed their homes to trap and conserve heat in unbelievably smart ways. Imagine walls lined with animal hides soaked in fat to create natural water-resistant, windproof layers, a kind of nature's version of Gore-Tex. These hides weren't just covering their bodies. They were literally skin-wrapping their homes, adding a cloak of fatty insulation that kept warmth in and cold out. This combo was so effective that scientists today estimate Viking houses lost up to 60% less heat compared to other wooden structures in similar conditions. Of course, burning fat comes with a catch. You need the fat in the first place, which means the Vikings had to maintain a diet rich in animal products, especially fatty meats and blubbery fish. Archaeological studies show their diets were about 75% fat-rich, which not only supported their heating needs, but also kept their bodies warm. Imagine fueling your internal furnace like a high-efficiency diesel engine, constantly burning fatty acids to keep your core temp high, while simultaneously collecting stockpiles of animal fat for their fat heaters. It's a full-circle energy loop that today's eco-friendly systems would envy. And it didn't stop there. Vikings even transported chunks of animal fat waxed into stone containers during their long sea voyages, turning their ship's quarters into floating, semi-heated huts. Picture rows of small fat lamps burning quietly, their orange glows reflecting off the icy waters, fighting off hypothermia even in the middle of a frozen ocean. For days or weeks at sea with no sun, through storms and snow, that little flame meant the difference between life and death. All of this ancient ingenuity gives us a new lens to view Viking survival, not just as fearsome raiders, but as pioneering engineers of warmth, redefining what it meant to survive in the Arctic edge long before modern heating systems. They converted what sounds like kitchen scraps into life-saving energy sources, turning animal fat from leftovers to luxury. It's like upgrading from candles to central heating, but thousands of years early. But even with their fat heaters and high-fat diets, the Vikings faced another challenge: smoke. Burning fat releases not just heat, but also thick fumes with a unique smell that over time could be suffocating in poorly ventilated spaces. Yet the Vikings designed their homes with clever ventilation chimneys and soot traps. Imagine small vents strategically placed to funnel smoke outside while keeping precious heat inside, essentially the medieval version of a smokeless stove. This balance was crucial. Too much smoke, and your house felt like a campfire inferno. Too little ventilation, and you risked carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, before we dive deeper into how Vikings engineered these ventilation systems and the wider cultural practices surrounding these heated homes, think about this. In a world without thermometers, electricity, or even reliable firewood, Vikings mastered the art of turning animal fat into a constant, controlled heat source that kept them alive and thriving in one of the harshest climates on Earth. They essentially made their homes into warm sanctuaries, powered by the natural resources around them, in a way that many modern green heating ideas can learn from. So next time you complain about your electric bill in winter or curse the frost creeping under your door, remember the Viking fat heaters, those ancient, smelly, persistent flames that burned through the darkest nights and the coldest chills. And don't worry, we're just getting started. Up next, we'll explore the exact techniques Vikings used to render their fat, how they constructed their heating containers like Viking thermostats, and what lessons these ancient tricks hold for anyone dreaming of sustainable warmth today. Stay tuned, because the story of Viking warmth is about to get even hotter. Now, let's dive into the gritty details of how the Vikings transformed raw animal fat into a 24-hour room heater that wasn't just a flickering flame, but a steady source of life-saving warmth. Picture the scene: a Viking chieftain's longhouse, walls lined with thick hides, snow piling up outside, and inside, low orange glows spreading cozy heat far beyond what any wood fire could achieve on its own. How exactly did that happen? First, the magic started with the rendering process. The Vikings didn't just pile animal fat into a pot and light it up. No, they had a delicate and patient method of extracting the purest fat that would burn clean and long. Imagine them slowly heating large cauldrons filled with blubber from seals, reindeer fat, or even whale oil, carefully cooking out impurities and water. This slow melting, often done just above 120 degrees F, separated the liquid fat from the grit and protein residue, creating a clear golden oil. Modern experiments show this fat could burn for up to 12 hours straight in a single container, especially when stored in sealed clay or stone vessels designed to hold its heat and control the burn rate. Think about this like ancient candle making, but on a heroic scale. Unlike wood, which burns hot but fast, or peat that smokes and sputters, rendered animal fat burns with a stable flame that radiates heat slowly but steadily. Today's experts liken it to a 1,000-watt electric heater's output, except this Viking device required no sockets, just a consistent supply of rendered fat. That slow, glowing burn was a game changer in survival terms, allowing entire families to sleep undisturbed, while the fat lamps kept their homes at a bearable 65-70 degrees F, even when brutal storms howled outside. But it wasn't just the fat itself, it was the vessels that held it. Vikings crafted sophisticated containers from locally sourced stone and fired clay, thick enough to act like ancient radiators. Imagine thick-walled ceramic pots, sometimes 2 feet wide and lined with a layer of soot-resistant clay, designed to retain and radiate heat well after the flame died down. Heat transfer studies suggest these basins slowly released radiant warmth for hours, warming the air and even the walls around them, similar to how modern radiant floor heating units work quietly and efficiently. These containers were often raised on stone stands to increase airflow, optimizing combustion while keeping soot and smoke at bay. Picture the glowing altar of warmth in the center of the longhouse, more than a fire pit, less like a candle, and more like a medieval radiator that could run overnight without attention. These heat emitters weren't just technology. They were comfort zones in the Arctic wilderness, a lesson in energy efficiency carved from trial, error, and sharp survival instincts. Still, the Vikings had another brutal challenge: smoke and smell. Burning fat produces odors far from the sweet pine or clean burning wood you might expect, more like smoky bacon crossed with a pungent old kitchen grease. Imagine being trapped inside a peptide-saturated chamber, shrouded in aromas that today might make you run for the windows. But for the Vikings, the fetid smell was a sign of warmth and survival, a rugged perfume that said, "We're alive." To manage smoke, they developed clever ventilation systems. Sounds simple, not when you're living in a dense, poorly insulated hut with a fire that smokes differently than wood. Vikings carved small chimneys from stone and built adjustable vents near the roof edges, ensuring that the smoke had an escape route without sucking out precious heat. Archaeological digs reveal soot-stained stone channels carved with surprising precision, acting like medieval exhaust pipes, directing smoke upwards while retaining the fat heater's radiant warmth inside. The design was a balance, a small opening to let smoke out but not open so wide that warmth escaped, like the perfect draft on a modern stovepipe. And here's where Viking family life intertwined with their heat tech in a fascinating way. Often, they'd cluster their sleeping areas close to these fat heaters, not only to soak in the warmth, but to leverage the limited combustion's heat escape by lying low on fur-covered benches or raised platforms. Imagine wrapping yourself in fat-soaked hides, a natural insulator coated with tiny layers of fat acting like a barrier against cold air, as effectively as modern Gore-Tex jackets do for hikers. Those skins absorbed and re-radiated heat, making the sleeping layers themselves part of the warmth ecosystem. The combination of radiant heat from the fat burners plus the insulating power of fat-saturated hides turned homes into survivable havens in a world where hypothermia was an ever-present threat. But animal fat heaters didn't just transform homes, they defined Viking maritime endurance. Longships were notoriously cold, cramped, and drafty. Yet Vikings adapted by bringing fats along on voyages, storing them in sealed stone jars designed to survive ocean sloshing. On board, small fat lamps were lit in stone lanterns, keeping sleeping quarters just warm enough to stave off frostbite. Imagine sitting in a narrow wooden ship, surrounded by icy winds and black seas, while your faint orange glow from a fat lamp battles the night's freezing grip. Without those tiny flames, many of those voyages, sometimes lasting weeks in sub-zero temps, would have ended not in conquest but in tragedy. And let's not overlook the diet that made this possible. Vikings didn't just burn fat, they lived on it. Archaeological isotope analysis indicates their diets were 70–75% fat-rich, with seals, fish, and reindeer providing the bulk of their calories. This was more than culinary choice. It was physiological necessity. Their high-fat intake ramped up metabolism, helping maintain core body heat in brutal conditions, a biological furnace fueling both body and home, creating a feedback loop of survival. It's like running a double-burner stove. Food kept them warm from the inside, rendered fat heated the outside. Modern studies on the Inuit and other Arctic peoples confirm this fat-fueled lifestyle is key to thriving in polar climates. So what does this mean for us, thousands of years later? The Vikings' use of animal fat as a heating source was an ingenious form of sustainable resource management. Burning, renewable material that was both waste product and fuel, with minimal environmental impact, low-tech yet incredibly efficient. The controlled slow burn, the clever container design, and the double-layered insulation with fat-soaked hides blend science and survival in a way that modern green heating startups could learn from. Imagine applying similar principles today. Renewable, slow-release biofuels combined with advanced insulation techniques inspired by nature's own Gore-Tex. Every element, the rendering, the heating basins, the ventilation, the insulation, and the diet, formed a holistic heat management system that allowed Vikings to beat the brutal climate again and again. Their homes became sanctuaries not just from cold, but from death itself, all powered by a resource they gathered from the very animals they hunted and valued for sustenance. In reflecting on this, it's clear that Viking survival was as much about mind as muscle. Their ability to observe, experiment, and innovate with the materials around them set them apart in a frozen world that was unforgiving. They leveraged what seemed like a humble, even undesirable resource, animal fat, turning it into a life-saving heat source. This wasn't just heating. It was engineering, nutrition, and environmental mastery wrapped into one fiery solution. So next time you sit by your thermostat or adjust your heater dial, remember the Vikings and their blazing fat basins. Their warmth was more than physical comfort. It was hope, safety, family, survival, legacy. Every choice they made carried the weight of generations. The fierce will to protect what they had built in a world where a misstep meant freezing to death. They conquered not just enemies but elements, using the fire of animal fat to carve out life in the very edge of the known earth. And as modern humans scramble to find sustainable ways to keep warm amidst climate challenges and rising energy costs, the Viking fat heater story might just light the path forward, reminding us that sometimes the oldest answers are found in the most unexpected places. The past holds the keys to resilience if only we dare to look, learn, and burn a little brighter, just like those ancient flames. In the chilling dance between human will and nature's fierce grip, Vikings showed us all a timeless truth. Survival is never just about enduring. The truly ingenious transform adversity into warmth, light, and life. Their legacy flickers now in every radiant heat panel, every biofuel innovation, and every small fire that keeps us safe. And for that, the cold will never win.